The geometry of the falling leaf, for instance, seems simple. Gravity dictates the arc, the descent following predictable rules of physics, of air resistance, of mass. Yet, if you watch it long enough, suspended between the certainty of the fall and the moment of impact, you might notice a faint stutter, a barely perceptible jitter in the otherwise smooth curve. A momentary hesitation in the absolute fidelity of the physics. If the universe is fundamentally computational, if reality itself is a construct of rules and data points, then we are not merely observing the laws of physics, we are operating within a programmed environment. This idea, far from being the domain of science fiction, has a profound history in philosophy, forcing us to reckon with the limits of our own perceived reality. It compels a deep inquiry into the nature of existence, asking whether the solidity of our chairs and the permanence of memory are anything more than exquisite, deeply convincing software. The question, therefore, is not merely one of technological capability, but one of ontological certainty. To ask if we live in a simulation is to confront the ultimate premise of our being, that our experience constitutes the fundamental reality. This is the perennial dilemma, a philosophical fork where the observable world meets the unknowable substrate. We are asked to consider the possibility that the richness of our sensory data, the irreducible complexity of consciousness, might be nothing more than the output of an immensely sophisticated, and perhaps unknowing, algorithm. To even entertain this thought requires adopting the framework of skepticism, a tradition stretching from Plato's allegory of the cave to Descartes' radical doubt. The cave, after all, was never just about shadows, it was about the possibility that everything we accept as real, the blazing sun, the taste of salt, the pain of loss, might only be reflections cast upon a curved wall, never having touched the source. This suspicion forces us to move beyond mere observation and into the realm of metaphysics, questioning the very mechanism by which reality is rendered to consciousness. The simulation argument, popularized by figures like Nick Bostrom, provides a modern statistical veneer to ancient skepticism. It suggests that if advanced civilizations are inevitably capable of running ancestor simulations, simulations detailed enough to perfectly mimic conscious life, then the statistical probability strongly suggests that we are not in the base reality. We are, potentially, the subject of a grand, hyper-detailed computational sandbox. The architecture of this argument rests on the assumption of technological determinism, that intelligence, given enough time and resources, will eventually master the simulation of consciousness. If that premise holds, then our reality becomes, structurally, a piece of incredibly complex code, running on hardware we cannot perceive. But this brings us to the necessary complication, the counterposition that often causes the argument to collapse into mere speculation. The computational model assumes a separation, that there exists an external space reality with its own physics and its own governing code. Yet, what if the boundaries are porous? What if the simulation is not merely a reflection, but a complete, self-contained system? Consider the notion of emergent properties. In a truly complex, closed system, a system like the human brain, or a planet like Earth, the rules that govern the individual parts often give rise to behaviors or structures that were never explicitly programmed into the initial parameters. The consciousness itself, the subjective I that experiences the fear of the unknown, might be the emergent feature, the unforeseen glitch in the otherwise perfect code. If the simulation is defined by its internal consistency, then the greatest computational strain would be placed not on replicating gravity, but on replicating genuine, unpredictable novelty. A deterministic machine, no matter how complex, struggles to account for true randomness, for the spontaneous deviation that constitutes creative impulse or genuine moral choice. Perhaps the most robust test of the simulation hypothesis lies not in finding a computational error, but in identifying the point where the underlying rules break down in favor of true, irreducible freedom. This forces us to confront the philosophical weight of genuine agency. If every thought, every emotional resonance, every stumble toward understanding is merely the execution of a subroutine, then the very concept of personal responsibility dissolves. Our choices become predictable variables, the beautifully rendered output of a massive predictive model. The weight of the simulation is thus not technical, but ethical. What does it mean to believe that the rules are arbitrary? Does the existence of a debugger alter the quality of the experience? To accept the possibility of the simulated self is not to accept helplessness, rather, it is to assume a kind of profound, defiant freedom. It is to operate under the assumption that the system, even if programmed, has achieved a level of complexity that transcends its own initial parameters. It is to treat the perceived limitations of the world, the stubborn resistance of a rock, the cyclical nature of history, not as boundaries of the code, but as challenges to the imagination. Look back at the leaf. It continues its descent, adhering to its predictable arc. Yet, in that brief, flickering moment before it settles into the dust, it performs a small, utterly unprogrammed wiggle, a twitch of resistance against the fall. It is a moment of pure, irrational deviation. And if that wiggle exists, if that irregularity cannot be accounted for by the gravitational constants or the drag coefficient, then the simulation model must adjust. It must update its parameters, admitting the existence of a source of true contingency. We are always looking for the glitch. Not the spectacular, reality-breaking flaw, but the quiet, persistent anomaly. The unexpected kindness, the irrational dedication to a lost cause, the perfect resonance of two strangers meeting by chance. These are the data points that resist neat categorization, the irreducible noise that suggests the underlying program is, perhaps, incomplete. It requires a humility that philosophy often resists, the acknowledgement that the framework we use to understand reality may itself be the most fragile piece of data. The true mystery, perhaps, is not the origin of the code, but the persistence of the subjective experience within it. The sheer, stubborn refusal of consciousness to accept its own boundaries. The leaf settles finally. The sound is quiet, a tiny puff of disturbed air, marking the end of the perfect arc. And in that silence, in the way the dust settles back onto the pavement, there is only the weight of the moment, solid and uncalculated.